Moving along. So we got the Etruscans, we got the historical background, the super abbreviated historical background, and now we're going to talk about what they actually wore. So we're going to talk about social distinction in dress. I can get that out. We're going to talk about fabrics and clothing production. We're going to talk about the toga, and we're just going to talk about dive more into what they wore. So get ready. So let's talk about social distinction in dress. So it has been noted that dress for a Roman, if not primarily, signified rank and status and office and authority. And Roman literary sources indicate what married women wore, and that married women had a distinctive, item of dress. Um, where we'll have a depiction of it in the picture here, that she wore a distinctive type of dress known as a stola, and that she began to wear her hair in a distinctive style as well. And when women became widowed, they wore a dark cloak for at least a year after her husband's death. So again, you see some of these rituals that we have for mourning are not they're not contemporary. They come back from way, way, way back. Okay. And, in spite of socioeconomic differences among Romans, the primary distinction made in Roman society for men was citizen and non citizen. And this status was clearly marked by what they wore. Only male citizens, were entitled to wear a toga. It's that, draped garment that you see here. Slaves, foreigners, and women were prohibited from wearing that garment. They wore um, either a more Greek style chiton, or they wore a tunic, but the toga was only allowed. It was the distinction that you were a Roman citizen. And upper class men generally belong to some civil or military orders. They may have been a senator, and depending on those statuses, the type of toga you wore could be different as well. Fabrics, right? Fabrics, right? Throughout Roman history, wool was the major fiber used for clothing production. So right behind it is our good friend flax, which made linen, right? So wool and linen. Again, wool and linen were used in the time of the Roman Republic. We have literary sources that talk about them, and the crazy part is, unlike the Greeks, in the Roman Republic, we hear of ready to wear garments being worn. So when we talked about the Mycenaeans and Greeks, we talked about how creating a fabric, weaving and sewing it into a garment was something that was made in each home. And in the Roman Republic, we see that there were ready to wear garments. We also, from literary sources, we have discovered that clothing that was used, so since only citizens could wear the toga, right? Clothing that was used, togas that were used, were cut into patches and made into cloaks or quilts. They were repurposed and made into other garments for for the poorer citizens or for slaves. Again, linen and wool could be, gauze like, or they could be woven. Some of them had a soft pile or tapestry like. There was just a lot of variations because of the social structure on how items were woven, but they were essentially wool, flax, and of course we do see cotton mentioned in Roman writings around 200 BC, even though it was probably imported earlier. So by the end of that first century, the Common Era silk was again available to the wealthy. We know it was imported from China through the Silk Road, and since it was so expensive, um, silk fibers themselves were all often woven with other fibers. We know that as a blend now, right? You know, as a blend, such as linen, because linen was fine as well. And, you know, on the very rare occasions that a garment was made completely of silk, it was valued in its weight in gold. And, you know, we've talked about that. And when we talked about China, that fine silk was valued in its weight in gold. So again, fabrics were dyed in a wide range of colors, much like in the Greek world. And again, purple was the most rare, fine, and important of all the colors that were used. The color purple was, you know, used to dye the border. We talked about in Greek life, the border of wedding dresses, and in Rome, for high-ranking citizens, it was the border of their togas. So, although women in Greek life were closely associated with fabric production, women didn't necessarily weave the cloth themselves. I said that there was a ready-to-wear market, believe it or not, which is much different than the Greek society that we know of. And even though women weren't responsible for it in their homes, there was an actual textile industry where many of the workers were slaves, not the same type of slavery that we think about when we think of American slavery, but much of the weaving and dyeing and finishing was carried out in establishments that, you know, could have up to 100 employees. So this was large scale production, large scale production. So these, you know, kind of factories were in many towns throughout the empire, and some towns were especially well known for making certain types of cloth or certain items of clothing. So when we think of our fashion centers, we think of, you know, New York and Paris and Milan, you know, maybe Barcelona. We think of specific garments that are made that are their specialty, and ancient Rome was the same, had the same setup, where some cities were more known than others for the fabric that they wove or specific items that they were made. So, you know, you might want a cloak from Medina, right? Or a tunic from, you know, from Scythia. Like it was just like, this came from such and such, right? So it made it more valuable. So again, fabrics in the ancient world, they're the same fabrics over and over: wool, linen, silk, cotton. Not in that order. Actually, in Roman order, it would be wool, linen, cotton, and then silk. So fabrics, again, always really important in not just the society, but oftentimes in the reputation of a city. What do they wear, right? The basic form of what they worn, we've seen, is just the chiton and the tunic, which is just an adaptation of the Greek and Etruscan garments. And you know, the most distinctive Roman, in my air quotes, Roman article of clothing, Roman garment is the toga, right? And the toga, again, is believed to have some Etruscan origin. Couldn't get that word out, right? When historians look at Roman garments, they give the descriptors Latin words. So you're gonna learn a little bit of Latin. My Latin ain't great, but I got these words down. So when they describe the clothing, they describe things that were put on, which, you know, are called induntas. and garments that were wrapped around that were draped, amictus, and garments that were put on were tunics, right? And amictus, right? Things that are wrapped around is just the toga. So the tunic was put on underneath, and the toga was wrapped around. And in the lecture underneath this video, there is a list of all the different types of togas. There were different types, right? And some of their uses, but again, the toga was a garment that was worn by adult males, and over time, toga took on a symbolic meaning and became increasingly restricted. So again, initially in Rome, men and women wore tunics, but as we got to about the first century of the Common Era, there were actually rules that restricted the use to male citizens only. And the practice of having, boys wear togas with a purple border. Girls who, until they reached puberty, were actually allowed to wear togas. So make sure you check out the list underneath here, underneath the lecture with the different types of togas. But the earliest togas is the basis of later styles, and they were draped in length, and they were made of white wool fabric of a semicircular shape and a band of color. That's really the basic dress. Like, wool was undyed except for trim for people of a lower class. And if you think back several slides at this point, I think we're on like slide 5 when we were talking about the Etruscans, just how the toga went through a couple of different iterations. And if you look at the image on the screen, there are 3 different types of ways that a toga could be cut and folded and then draped. So all of those things were really, really important. And the toga is the most Roman thing that you can think of when you think of a Roman dress, and it was required in order to see the emperor. It was required at spectacles staged in the Colosseum, any event where citizens appeared in official capacity. It had to be worn. It was made out of wool for the most part. So it was heavy, and it was probably really uncomfortable and hot in the summer. And and it was white. That's the other thing. It was dirty, got dirty really, really easy. So it is the garment, the unofficial official garment of the Roman citizenry. So next, because I always have a story. Next, on the next slide, I'm going to share a story about, I'm going to share actually some poetry about advice for Roman men and women getting dressed. Okay, so here's my story. Again, since just like Greece, we had authors and writers, historians and poets whose documents, philosophers whose documents survive to this day. So the Roman poet Ovid has a book of poetry called "The Art of Love," and he gives advice on how to get dressed, how to get dressed, and how to attract the opposite sex. So this is what he says. This is what he says to the fellas. For the men, he says, don't be crimping your locks with the use of the curling iron. Yes, they used curling irons back in the day. Don't scrape the hair off your legs using the coarse pumice stone. Men should not care too much for good looks. Neglect is becoming. Let your person be clean, your body tanned by the sunshine. Let your toga fit well, never a spot on its white. Don't let your sandals be scuffed, nor let your feet flap around in them loosely. See that your teeth are clean, brush them at least twice a day. Don't let your hair grow long, and when you visit a barber, patronize only the best and don't let him mangle your beard. Keep your nails short, don't ever let them be dirty. Keep the little hairs out of your nose and ears. Let your breath be sweet and your body be free from rank odors. And that's in book 1. So he just told y'all, get it together, fellas. he said, don't worry about your looks, but then he told you to worry about your looks. He said, make sure your clothes is right and you're not spotty. Make sure your shoes are shined and you're not walking around nutty. Make sure your teeth is clean, your barber shapes you up right, and that you ain't funky. Right? I love this story. Love this poem so much. So he don't leave the men out. He don't leave the women out though. He don't leave the women out. He got a lot more to say about the women, but what he says in book 3 to the women, he says he does not endorse the wools reddened with Tyrian dye. So basically, don't be flashy. He said red was a I don't know. It was a color that they didn't want people to wear in ancient times. Partly because it symbolized blood. That's a whole other story. But he said, don't wear that thing that's red, right? It says, let me see. When you have a choice of cheaper and pleasanter colors, you'd be crazy not to only use one that has a costly display. So basically, don't be cheap with your stuff, right? He says, let's see. I'm gonna skip around. He said, not every color will suit everyone's needs. So many colors. Choose the right ones. If your complexion is fair, dark gray is a suitable color. If you are dark, dress in white. Also, I need not remind you to brush your teeth night and morning. Need not remind you your face ought to be washed when you rise. You know what to apply to acquire a brighter complexion. Art supplies the means for patching an incomplete eyebrow. Basically, he said, put some makeup on and get your eyebrows together. Art or beauty spot aids the cheeks that never have a flaw. There is nothing amiss in the darkening of eyes with mascara. Don't let your and then he said put some makeup on, and then he said don't let your lover find the boxes displayed on your dresser. Art that dissembles art gives the most happy effect. So basically he said don't have your makeup out, and dissemble just means to lie. So don't tell people that you're putting makeup on. So art that doesn't look, it should be natural. You should look like you're not wearing makeup even though you're wearing makeup. So he just says, who wants to look at a face so smeared with paint that it's dripping? So I just find that funny that even in ancient times, folks had opinions about what we should wear. But he had something for the fellas too. He told the fellas to keep their stuff together, and he told the ladies pick the right colors and don't go crazy with your makeup. So I just love finding stories in antiquity that talk about how they dressed and what they did to get ready. So it's like the story of Hera, getting dressed to get her man Zeus to do what she wanted him to do, right? They talk about all the primping and all the things that we do to get together right now.